A plume of acrid smoke billowed towards Karen's open window, the stench of burning rubber instantly twisting her gut. Leaping from her desk, she threw open the window wider, her eyes scanning the street below. There, engulfed in flames, was her Harley, her prized, cherry red road king. It wasn't an accident. Someone had doused it in gasoline and set it ablaze. Fury, raw and primal, roared through her veins. Her eyes darted to the curb where a group of her neighbors stood watching, their faces a mixture of shock and thinly veiled satisfaction. Her gaze locked onto Gladys, the HOA president, her lips stretched into a smug smile. Gladys, who'd hounded her relentlessly to join the HOA since the day she moved in 6 months ago. Gladys, who believed everyone should bow to her iron-fisted rule over their suburban kingdom. Karen's hand instinctively went to her hip, her fingers brushing against the cold steel of her badge. No, not today. Not when her blood was boiling with the kind of rage that could only be quenched by seeing Gladys squirm. She needed to be smart about this, expose Gladys for the venomous viper she was, all while wearing her civilian clothes. She stormed out of her house, ignoring the heat radiating from her burning bike. Who did this? She roared, her voice shaking with barely suppressed fury. Gladys, her face a grotesque mask of fox concern, patted Karen's arm condescendingly. Oh, honey, what a shame. You really should have parked it in your garage. This neighborhood attracts all sorts, you know, especially with you not being a part of our little community. A collective murmur of agreement rippled through the small crowd. Karen bit back a scathing retort, her mind racing. It was clear as day. They had orchestrated this, a twisted message for daring to defy Gladys and her HOA tyranny. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a declaration of war. And Karen, even without the badge, knew how to wage war. You think this scares me? She spat, her voice dangerously low. This just made it personal. The fire truck siren wailed in the distance, but Karen barely registered the sound. She locked eyes with Gladys, a steely glint in her gaze. You made a big mistake, Gladys. A very big mistake. Karen's words hung in the air, a promise of retribution that silenced even the crickets chirping in the nearby bushes. Gladys, however, mistook Karen's controlled fury for fear. Her smile widened, revealing a row of teeth that could rival a shark's. Oh, Karen. Gladys chuckled, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. You're not going to do anything rash, are you? You wouldn't want to make enemies in your first year here, especially not with the annual block party coming up. The neighbors, emboldened by Gladys's condescending tone, began to murmur amongst themselves, casting sideways glances at Karen. A few even had the audacity to smirk. Karen felt a surge of disgust. They were all complicit, happy to watch her burn, both literally and figuratively, as long as it meant staying on Gladys's good side. But Karen had been trained to see through facades, to read the subtle tells that betrayed true intentions. And she saw it then, a flicker of unease in Gladys's eyes, a tightening of her jaw that belied her confident demeanor. Gladys was worried. Good. Don't worry, Gladys, Karen purred, her voice deceptively sweet. I wouldn't dream of missing the block party. It'll be a great opportunity to get to know everyone better. She let her gaze sweep over the crowd, her expression hardening. After all, we wouldn't want a repeat of this unfortunate incident now, would we? The arrival of the fire truck, sirens blaring, broke the tense silence. As the firefighters battled the smoldering remains of her bike, Karen excused herself, retreating to her house. She could feel their eyes on her back, a mix of curiosity and fear. Closing the door behind her, Karen allowed a grim smile to touch her lips. These people had no idea who they were messing with. Gladys may have orchestrated this, but Karen would be the one writing the ending. And it would be a masterpiece of justice, served ice cold. The acrid smell of smoke still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the violation Karen had witnessed just moments ago. Her blood simmered, but her mind worked with the cold precision of a seasoned investigator. She had to play this smart. She needed evidence, something concrete to expose Gladys and her cronies. Pulling out her laptop, Karen quickly reviewed the footage from her home security system. The camera, strategically positioned above her garage, had captured the entire incident. As she watched the grainy footage of a hooded figure dousing her bike in gasoline, a surge of triumph shot through her. They may have thought they were being clever, but they hadn't counted on her foresight. The figure on the video was tall and lean, their face obscured by the hood and the low resolution. But one detail jumped out at Karen. A distinctive silver ring worn on the figure's left hand, shaped like a serpent with ruby eyes. It was a unique piece, one she'd noticed on a certain neighbor before. A neighbor who just happened to be Glaze's right-hand man, the HOA treasurer with a penchant for Hawaiian shirts and gossip, Mr. Henderson. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Karen's face. Mr. Henderson, despite his seemingly harmless persona, had always struck her as someone who enjoyed wielding power over others. He was Gladys's mouthpiece, her enforcer. And now, he was also her biggest liability. Karen knew she couldn't go to the police not yet. Not without risking tipping her hand and sending Gladys into hiding. No, this called for a more delicate touch, a strategic maneuver that would expose Gladys and her cronies without blowing her cover. She glanced at the clock. The annual block party was just 2 days away. Perfect. She'd play their game, pretend to be intimidated, all the while weaving a web around them, tightening the noose with each passing hour until they had nowhere left to run. This wasn't just about a bike anymore. It was about justice, and Karen was going to serve it, one meticulously planned move at a time. The next 48 hours were a delicate dance. Karen played the role of the victim, projecting an air of vulnerability while secretly relishing the growing panic she detected in Gladys and her cohorts. She noticed their furtive glances, their hushed whispers whenever she was near. Their tirade of concern was almost comical. Almost. She made sure to bump into Mr. Henderson during her daily jogs, offering him a tight smile and a pointed look at his left hand. He'd quickly shove it into his pocket, his face turning a delightful shade of crimson. Yes, Mr. Henderson was definitely sweating under pressure. Karen knew she needed more than a hunch and a nervous neighbor to bring Gladys down. So she did what any resourceful off-duty state trooper would do. She utilized her network. A quick, discreet call to a colleague at the station provided her with a list of recent pawn shop transactions involving jewelry matching the serpent ring's description. Bingo. Armed with this newfound information, Karen decided to pay Mr. Henderson a visit. She found him meticulously pruning his prize-winning roses, his face drawn and pale. Feigning concern, she inquired about his well-being. "You seem stressed, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice dripping with fox sweetness. "Is everything all right?" He jumped, startled by her sudden appearance. "Oh, Karen, it's just the heat. You know how it is." "Of course," she purred, taking a step closer, her eyes fixed on his trembling hands. "I just wanted to let you know how grateful I am for all the support from you and Gladys. She's told me so much about your wonderful community spirit." The mention of Gladys's name seemed to drain the last bit of blood from Mr. Henderson's face. He stammered, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Karen smiled inwardly. He was about to crack. "Actually, Karen," Mr. Henderson blurted out, his voice high-pitched and shaky. "It's Gladys we need to worry about. She can be quite persuasive." Karen raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Persuasive? How so?" Mr. Henderson wrung his hands, his gaze darting between Karen and his meticulously manicured lawn. She has ways of getting what she wants. And she really wanted you in the HOA, saw you as a threat to her little empire." He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening in horror, as if realizing he'd said too much. But it was too late. Karen had him right where she wanted him. "Go on, Mr. Henderson," she urged softly, her voice a study in gentle encouragement. You were saying something about Glades and her methods. He shifted from foot to foot, his face a mask of anguish. I can't say any more. She'll ruin me. Karen placed a reassuring hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. You don't have to do this alone, you know. We can stand up to her together. Just tell me what happened. He hesitated for a moment, then caved. The words came tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and fear. A confession that painted a damning picture of Glades' reign over the HOA. He spoke of intimidation tactics, of blackmail, of funds mysteriously disappearing from the HOA account. And then, the bombshell. Glades had ordered him to torch Karen's bike as a warning. Karen listened patiently, her face a picture of concern and sympathy, all the while etching every word, every detail into her memory. Mr. Henderson had just handed her the weapon she needed to dismantle Glades and her tyranny, piece by piece. The game was about to change. The block party was in full swing. Red, white, and blue streamers fluttered in the breeze, the smell of grilled hot dogs and hamburgers hung heavy in the air, and children's laughter echoed down the street. But beneath the veneer of suburban bliss, a storm was brewing. Karen, armed with Mr. Henderson's confession and a hidden microphone tucked discreetly beneath her summer dress, moved through the crowd with the grace of a predator stalking its prey. She exchanged pleasantries with neighbors, all the while observing Glades, who held court in the center of it all, a smug smile plastered on her face. Karen made sure to linger near Glades and her inner circle, catching snippets of their conversations, their veiled threats about troublemakers who didn't understand how things worked around here. She watched as Glades, her eyes gleaming with avarice, pocketed wads of cash from the raffle ticket sales, her smile widening with each transaction. The microphone picked up everything, recording it all for posterity. It was almost too easy. Glades' arrogance, her utter lack of awareness, was astounding. Then, Karen made her move. She casually sidled up to Glades, a plate of cookies in hand. "These look delicious, Glades," she said, her voice deceptively sweet. "You really outdid yourself at the party this year." Glades, momentarily distracted by Karen's compliments, preened under her gaze. "Well, Karen, it takes experience to run a successful event, something you clearly lack." She chuckled, her voice dripping with condescension. "But don't worry, you'll learn. Once you're part of the HOA, of course." Karen's smile widened, a predatory gleam entering her eyes. "Oh, I wouldn't be so sure about that, Glades," she purred, leaning in close, her voice barely a whisper. "You see, I've learned quite a bit these past few days. Things you wouldn't want other people to know." Glades stiffened, her smile faltering for the first time that day. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice a shade too high. Karen's smile turned icy. "Oh, I think you do, Glades," she countered, her voice still low, but with an underlying steel. "Let's see, where should I begin? Should we discuss Mr. Henderson's unfortunate gambling debts? Or perhaps his sudden acquisition of that rather expensive antique watch? The one he just couldn't resist pawning, even though it held sentimental value." The blood drained from Glades' face, leaving behind a sickly shade of gray. Her eyes darted around frantically, searching for an escape, but Karen had her trapped. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, fell silent, their eyes darting back and forth between Karen and Glades like spectators at a tennis match. "You wouldn't," Glades hissed, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and anger. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Karen countered, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small silver recorder. "You should really be more careful about who you trust, Glades, especially those you consider pawns in your little game." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Glades' carefully constructed facade crumbled before their eyes. The whispers started, growing louder with each passing second, fueled by years of pent-up resentment and suspicion. Karen pressed play on the recorder, and Mr. Henderson's voice, filled with fear and remorse, filled the air. His confession, clear and damning, echoed through the street, exposing Gladys' web of lies and manipulation for all to hear. Gladys lunged for the recorder, but Karen was too quick. She sidestepped easily, her movements honed from years of training. The recorder tumbled from Gladys' grasp, clattering to the pavement at her feet. The recording played on, each word a nail in Gladys' coffin. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, erupted in a cacophony of gasps and murmurs. Outrage, long suppressed under Gladys' reign, now bubbled to the surface. Gladys, her face a mask of panic, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "It's a lie," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "She's framing me. Don't believe her." But it was too late. The evidence was right there, laid bare for everyone to see. Her neighbors, once cowed by her authority, now looked upon her with a mixture of disgust and betrayal. The game was over, and Gladys knew it. Karen, her face impassive, let the recording play out to its bitter end. When it was finished, she calmly picked up the recorder and slipped it back into her purse. Then, she turned her gaze on Gladys, her eyes cold and hard as steel. "You messed with the wrong neighbor, Gladys," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "And now, you're going to face the consequences." She pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and waited, never taking her eyes off Gladys. "It's Trooper Miller," she said when the call connected. "I have a situation here. Seems we have a criminal mastermind operating under the guise of an HOA president." As Karen recited the address, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The jig was up. Gladys, her face ashen, crumpled to the ground, defeated. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the air, a symphony of justice for Karen and all those who had suffered under Gladys' tyranny. The party, once a symbol of Gladys' dominion, became a celebration of her downfall. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived, delivered by the unlikeliest of heroes. A quiet neighbor who refused to be bullied. A state trooper who knew that the law, like karma, could be a real party pooper. The scent of freedom, sweeter than any barbecue smoke, hung heavy in the air, a promise of a new era for the neighborhood. One where bikes could be parked without fear and HOAs actually served the community.